On today's World Insight, an 11th hour court ruling against the looming TikTok ban in the US. What's next for the popular social media app?
If you read the first draft got by the TikTok and the oracles, they designed these technical solutions to ensure the US individual data can be stored in the servers inside the United States.
And relations between China and Japan under a new prime minister. Likely cooperation between Asia's two top economies.
And he has a slightly different stance in politics in overseas. But economics, he may succeed Abenomics, which Prime Minister Abe started.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. We begin today's program with the troubled app TikTok. It received a reprieve of its ban from U.S. app stores on Sunday after a federal judge in Washington granted a preliminary injunction blocking an order of President Trump. The ruling comes hours before TikTok was to be removed from the mobile app stores. U.S. District Judge Carl Nichols, who was appointed to be on the bench by Trump in 2019, filed his decision. TikTok has been embroiled in a push-and-pull saga with President Trump for the past 2 months as it races to make a deal that will allow it to keep operating in the United States. It's proposed an arrangement that would create a new entity called TikTok Global that would include investments from Oracle and possibly Walmart. What does this temporary ban mean to the future of TikTok, especially with the election coming up in November in the U.S.? Let's talk to our guest. On TikTok, the latest in Shanghai, I'm joined by Shen Yi, director with the Fudan University's Research Center for Cyberspace Governance. In Los Angeles, U.S., William Li, chief economist from the Milken Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Waking up to the news, it's exciting. All the twists and turns. Mr. Li, what does it really mean, this field of opinion, and what would that mean for September the 30th?
Well, I think the judges allowed the two sides to have a little bit more time to get the negotiations completed, or at least more certain about the outcome. Because right now, as far as we're concerned in the United States, the issue of national security has been raised. The court has discussed it and said they haven't come down with a final decision, but there is an extension of time. And I think the key now is whether the Chinese authorities will approve the terms of the deal that is on the table right now. And I think it sounds like the president and the national security people are relatively happy with the situation as it now stands.
Professor Shen, what's your take? What's likely to be the new opportunities, so to speak?
The new opportunity is that the United States come back to a more normal track to dealing with these deals based on a more reasonable discussion of these issues, which means find out practical ways based on deliverable technology options, and so that the TikTok can make a good deal with the United States to solve the reasonable concern of national securities and the finding a balance of these the internet users and the profit, the profit of these TikTok companies.
What would happen from now until September the 30th, which is a time the court gives?
So these two guys, Oracle, Walmart, and TikTok, or any people's concern is deals. They need to make a more dialogue, communications, make a more proper and balanced draft of the final deals, the first. And the second, I think the U.S. side, especially inside the White House, need to come back to the normal status, which means take a more fair, balanced attitude to look at these reviews, to give up those overestimate of the so-called national cybersecurity concerns, so that we can have a normal atmosphere to push forward this deal.
One of the points raised by the lawyer from the TikTok side, Mr. Li, is about the First Amendment. Of course, that's concerning freedom of expression in the United States, very well known. So how sound will that argument be for a multinational company such as TikTok, which is headquartered in China?
Well, the First Amendment rights are concerning the ability of our citizens, U.S. citizens, to express themselves, and surely anyone who is on the TikTok platform is able to express themselves. I think the separate issue is who controls the data after the expression has been made. Are the people who made it, or are the owners ByteDance and TikTok? If it's ByteDance and TikTok, that means they can do whatever they want with the data, which includes passing it on to anybody else. And that's, I think, one of the deep issues now we are facing on the internet as the ownership of data. So I think the First Amendment right is already there. The real issue now concerns ownership of the data after it's been released into the internet. And I think that involves the national security concerns because, as we all know, a lot of the companies within China are obligated, if asked by the authorities to turn over the data, they have to do so. So the ownership issue comes down to who owns the data that's generated in the United States by U.S. citizens on the U.S. platform of TikTok.
Okay. And Mr. Shen, of course, it's interesting that Oracle comes into the overall final discussion. Chief executive of Oracle is well known for having some close relationship with both the Republican Party and the current administration. Having said that, though, how much of this do you think is about setting a precedence of multinational tech companies operating in the United States? Will they only apply to Chinese companies, or will the picture becoming even bigger?
The first is a very typical misreading of the so-called Chinese companies have these national security obligations to deliver the data as what the governments want. Frankly speaking, any companies, including especially United States companies, have such kind of duties and obligations according to U.S. law systems and the case. And the second, there is a very typical technical solutions to solve these issues. You can locate U.S. data inside the U.S. servers or in certain servers, and you can monitor the net flow or data flow of these servers to find out whether this data has been transferred or not. If you read the first draft got by the TikTok and the Oracles, they designed these technical solutions to ensure the U.S. individual data can be stored in the servers inside the United States so that the oracles can monitor the data flows. Actually, we have lots of such kind of examples. If you have reasonable concern on these things, we can finding a practical technical solutions for it. But if your concern based kind of misreading and misperceptions, that will make things tough. And go back to these oracle things. I think these oracle, they try to finding this as kind of opportunities. They can enter into this market so that they can take advantage of its identity based on its good relationship both with its administrations and the republics, so that they can first enter this market, got cooperation with TikTok, and based on their servers, they can make profits and monies. And the second, they can help the TikTok to make more persuasive solutions, become more confident. You not worry too much about so-called these data security issues.
What about the role of Chinese government? Earlier, the Chinese side has put forward the new regulation regarding what kinds of algorithm can be used outside the Chinese border. So, Mr. Shen, how will this, in a way, have been swaying the picture we see?
First, to all countries concerned national security in the cyber world, they all should take a kind of regulation of such kind of technologies so that they can protect their national security interests more effectively. And the second, in these very practical deals, when the Chinese government passed this modification of the technology regulation law systems is at a very interesting timing. At that time, TikTok faced the bullying from both U.S. companies and the U.S. governments. And this modification of these systems providing the possibility that Chinese government have effective law systems to protect the Chinese companies' lawful interest overseas.
Mr. Li, this is going to set an interesting precedence, possibly, in two regards. One is how data will be handled, how multinational companies will be operating inside the United States in terms of tech sector, and how much politics will be involved. On the other hand, this is likely to set a precedence about how Chinese and American tech companies are likely to work together, at least in this very uncertain time. Interestingly, we see this is all happening right before the November election. Mr. Li, how do we see all of this mixed up and the reality today?
Well, I think the TikTok issue has become such a big issue because we don't have a good trade deal, a phase 2 trade deal that protects intellectual property and a framework for dealing with multinational transfer of data and the ownership of data within a multinational corporation. Those are the issues that had to be ironed out in the phase 2 deal with a framework for protecting intellectual property rights and for cyber trade. And that's something that is yet to be done. Unfortunately, the trade talks have broken down to the point where, because of our elections and other issues, they haven't continued. So what you see now is the consequence of the absence of that framework, which we've talked about before, has been such a vital part of the negotiations between China and the United States. I think what we've learned from this is that the political issues, both countries, China and the U.S., want to protect the property rights of the companies within their jurisdictions. And certainly, China's concerned that the AI advances, which China has done leaps and bounds over, has to be protected, and that's understandable. But I think the privacy issues in the United States are also a paramount concern. And as I said earlier, the issue of ownership of data, and as Mr. Shen said, the protection can be taken technologically, but the legal issues of ownership still have to be decided, because who owns the data that are produced and reside within the United States? Is it the producers of the data? Mm-hmm. Is it ByteDance? Is it TikTok? Who is the owner? And that is the issue that I think has to be resolved in the courts.
So I guess it's also a precedence the U.S. has set that's likely to also have a huge impact on its own operations of companies and also intelligence abroad as well.
Well, the whole issue of data security, I think, is paramount for telecommunications as well as data generated and data storage. And I agree with you that I think the absence of a framework that is agreeable for both sides and a multilateral agreement where the rules of the internet have yet to be determined. And so Europe, United States, and China really have to sit down in negotiations for deciding how we conduct ourselves on the internet in the 21st century. And those rules haven't been decided. And you see this hodgepodge of deals, whether it's a commercial deal like TikTok or security deals about privacy of phone calls. Those are issues that have yet to be resolved.
Mr. Shen.
I think that's very interesting questions. At first, before Trump take this office, the U.S. and China already begin the negotiation on these things. And the second, China, United States, and European unions, and India, Russia, all these countries are trying to develop their own understandings how to regulate these data transport across federal regulations, how to protect intellectual properties. But there's one thing, a very critical question, whether such kind of regulation should be based on more balanced principles or unbalanced, self-centered principles. Here the real challenge is the United States, especially this government, want to launch a kind of very selfish principles, which means the United States can use its advantages to do everything or anything in the cyberspace. and all the other countries can do nothing, only with the U.S. allowance, then they can do very limited things.
Let me make it very clear that the negotiations that the Trump administration has conducted has really tried to benefit both sides, because we've taken a bilateral approach so we can address the specific issues of China and the United States. And we were making progress in the phase 1 and going into phase 2 talks. So I think the issue now going forward is to continue bilateral negotiations where both sides express what our mutual interests are, and to be able to reach a deal.
William Li, Shen Yi, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your analysis of the latest development with TikTok deal.